I've introduced you to the CFD process, okay? From us talking about what is CFD, examples of CFD, and how we start modeling from the conservation equations. Once we've obtained the conservation equations with the boundary conditions, we've looked at how to potentially discretize them based on the appropriate geometry and coordinate system, and using well-known or some discretization technique. All of this have been integrated into different commercial CFD codes. Okay, commercial means companies have developed these softwares that they charge us a lot of money to use in order to access the license files. So whether it's Fluent, ANSYS Fluent, okay, for example, Fluent started out being a software on its own for purely CFD analysis, and then ANSYS bought out Fluent, okay, and integrated it into its structural analysis system. So if you go into the ANSYS, you have the fluid flow analysis part, which is Fluent, and then you have the structural analysis part within it, okay? So you have all these different softwares. Some of them are more for research, okay, such as the CFD ship. Some are public domain. In other words, if you go online and Google, you can have public domain CFD softwares that you can use, okay? You just have to understand the input and the output, okay, and how to put in your properties and so forth and be able to use it. And then even in doing your CFDs, there are grid generation softwares, okay? A long time ago, in order to do Fluent, you needed the grid generation gambit, okay, to be able to generate your grid before you did your computations in Fluent. Others, grid generation is a flow visualization software, TechPlot, FieldView, and so forth. So all these software, COMSOL, ANSYS, CD, Adapco, the GridGen, and so Phoenix, all these are available softwares for CFD analysis. Knowing that we have these softwares for CFD analysis, then of course, now we have to get the CFD process in mind, okay? I have this challenge that I want to solve. I don't want to, my company cannot afford doing the experiment, okay? Maybe my advanced calculus, advanced differential equation solver, derivation skills are not that strong for me to derive a complete set of equations. And then even when I derive a complete set of equations, I may still need a computer to solve it, which is still complicated. So why don't I use CFD? Well, so what is the process of using CFD to solve a problem? Okay, so the purposes of CFD codes will be different for different applications, all right? Investigation of bubble fluid interactions for bubble flows, study of wave-induced massively separated flows, free surface flows, etc. So depending on the problem, okay, the application of the CFD code is different, okay? Depending on the specific purpose and the flow conditions of the problem, different CFD codes can be chosen for different applications, for aerospace, marine, combustion, multi-phase, and also flows. Once the purposes and the CFD codes chosen, okay? The CFD process is the step to set up the initial boundary value process and run the code. What is the first step? You have to know your geometry. Okay? How do I capture the geometry? We've already talked about capturing your geometry by either drawing it using a CAD, computer-aided software. If it's very complicated and I cannot draw it using a computer-aided software, now there are 3D scanners. Okay, there are 3D scanners that you can 3D scan it and obtain a digital image that you can import into your software. Okay, so that is how you create the geometry. You have to know the physics. Yes. Yes.
Some gas in the glass, the glass ceiling breaks, please go, please.
Mm-hmm.
So there's anything physical, like I'm talking about the car park.
Yeah, okay.
You can geometry be something I imagine.
Okay, that's a very good point. You see, this first geometry has a lot of implications. How do you determine the control volume that you are going to do your computation in? It goes back to our problem for our aerosol dispersion research. Okay, I want to look at the dispersion of NOx in the whole of Kumasi. How do I do that? Okay, or in the example that you gave, the glass is going to break up and be dispersed. How do you do that? Well, you do that by defining an area, by defining a control volume. So that control volume could just be a rectangular enclosure. Okay, that control volume could be a cylindrical enclosure. Okay, that control volume, if you are looking at the aerodynamics over the Earth, which is spherical, could be a spherical enclosure or a spherical surface. Okay, so this geometry basically saying that pay attention to the system that you want to analyze and come up with the appropriate geometry to use in doing your analysis. Once you have achieved that first step, then the next step is the physics. What are the conservation equations that you want to solve? Okay, if I go into any of these software, I have to tell the software, solve the conservation of mass. So I check the icon or the panel within that software that says that, okay, these are the conservation equations that I want to solve. Conservation of mass, conservation of momentum, conservation of energy, conservation of species. Okay? So I have to specify the physics. I have to discretize my geometry. I'm going to look at flow on the outside of the airfoil or flow within a pipe. Okay, so you have to discretize it. Okay, then you have to solve it and you have to prepare reports that you'll be sending to your chief engineer or your supervisor or your funding agency for the project to give them your results. Okay, and basically you do the post-processing part also in this scheme. Yes. Which one is difficult to deal with? Well, let's delve into it over here. Okay, so you see that the geometry involves what? It doesn't have the properties of the fluid. That means you have to get it from somewhere to integrate it to the software. That means that you have to write a user-defined script that will effectively integrate the properties that you are getting from another database to the system in order to solve it. Is the flow viscous or inviscid? What are your boundary conditions? What are your initial conditions? Okay, so you see that the physics can be very engaging. Okay, yes?
Sometimes, I don't know, similar models, I don't know, solve first, and the solution you use as starting point for. So, like a good example, we are used to maybe first with ideal gas to get some temperatures and whatever.
Very good. That's a good point. Yes, we do that. Okay, we do that. Another case in point is, properties are temperature dependent. Let's solve the problem for constant temperature and get a baseline. And then let's throw in more complexities to see how your system will change if the temperature changes when you include the nonlinearities. Or let's first solve the simple laminar flow problem before we make it more complicated with turbulent flow. Okay? So really, in the physics, that's where you're making these assumptions. Okay? It's nothing but making assumptions. Now, so even though I'm saying that, to your point, the problem can be very complicated, however, I can simplify it for myself depending on the assumptions that I'm making here, okay, for the physics. For the meshing part, I'm stuck as to whether it's unstructured or it is structured. In my software, do I have an automatic system for generating it, or do I have to input some transformations in order to generate my mesh? Similarly to the structured mesh. In solving, am I solving a problem as a steady or unsteady? Okay. How many iterations do I want to solve? Okay. What is my convergence limit? How precise do I want my answers, my solution? Okay, and what numerical solution scheme am I going to use? A tri-diagonal or pentadiagonal system or what? In terms of reports, okay, what do I want in terms of my output? Am I looking for lift, drag, velocity, or what? Or temperature? What type of reports do I want? Okay, do I just want an XY plot? Do I want a contour plot? Okay, now these two parts, I tell all my graduate students that don't give me any CFD solution when you haven't verified it and you haven't validated it. Okay, and so you may ask, how do I verify or how do I validate? Well, again, it goes to your point, Prof, where instead of solving the complete problem, maybe I'm going to solve it for a simple problem with known exact solution or with known experimental solution. Once I know that, hey, my solution works and I can apply it to this different system, then I go for it. Okay? So I've verified and I have validated. Yes?
Balance. So you've done some, let's say it's a reactive system.
Yes.
So you've done all this simulation. But they should base some hardware atomic balance, maybe from if it's gasification, let's say. The carbon in the fish should be equal to all the carbon that is. Is that verification?
Yes, that is part of the verification. Okay. Or another way of putting it is, okay, It's energy conservation, right? So there has to be an energy balance. Okay, so if you are not getting your energy or your atomic balance verification, then that means that it has to obey the first law. Okay, it has to obey the first law, it has to obey the laws of physics. Okay, and even in terms of verification, another verification that is important is what I call grid optimization. Okay, the solution that you get from a sparse grid. Okay, I talked about using a solution for 1 second versus 5 seconds. We know that the 1 second will give me a long time, but will give me a more accurate result. Similarly, a fine grid of a delta X, very small, and a delta Y, very small, will give me a more refined solution, a more accurate solution than using a large delta X and a large delta Y. Okay, so what I ask my students to do will be to do a grid optimization. First, do the experiment or the simulation with a coarse grid, a medium coarse, and a fine mesh. Let's see the results of these 3 cases. If it converges, if you see that as you keep reducing the grids, it is converging, then you know that you are in the right direction. And then the ultimate question is, well, what is my computational penalty in terms of resource and in terms of my accuracy desired? Do I want to spend all the time using the fine grid, or is the solution from the medium coarse grid close enough to the fine grid to use? Okay, and the final part, the post-processing, what type of contours, what type of vectors, what type of streamlines. This is just a little bit more detail in terms of the geometry, select geometry parameters and domain size. Selection of an appropriate coordinate system. Remember I said rectangular, cylindrical, or spherical. Determine the domain size and shape. Are we going to do the analysis over the whole of Kumasi or just KNUST? Okay, in terms of size and shape. Make appropriate simplifications. What kinds of shape needed to be used to best resolve the geometry, lines, circles, ovals, etc. For the commercial code, the geometry is usually created using the commercial software, either separated from the commercial code itself, like Gambit in Fluent, or the design modeler in SpaceClaim. Okay? For the physics, flow conditions and fluid properties. The flow conditions, is it inviscid, that is no viscosity or viscous? Is it laminar or is it turbulent? Is it isothermal or there's a temperature dependence? Fluid property. What are the fluid properties needed for the solution? Do I need density? Do I need viscosity? Do I have thermal conductivity and so forth? Okay. Flow conditions and properties usually presented in dimensional form in industrial commercial CFD software, whereas in non-dimensional variables for research codes. Okay, what is the difference? I'll talk about non-dimensionalization versus dimensional. There are some cases where, because of research, I want to non-dimensionalize my solution so that I can analyze my system for a whole range, okay, or for, I can transfer my solutions to different domains. And so for research-wise, it's best to do dimensional analysis, okay? The selection of models, different models usually fixed by codes, options for user to be chosen. And then the initial and boundary conditions not fixed by codes, user needs to specify them for different applications. So Miss Lydia and Professor, Doc, I need your properties. Okay, I need your time-dependent properties for our analysis. Yeah. In terms of meshes should be well designed to resolve important flow features, which are dependent upon the flow conditions, e.g. the Reynolds number, such as grid refinement inside the wall boundary, okay? Wall boundary layer, okay? And let me just go back, bear with me as I go back and to this figure. You see, if I'm doing flow over an aircraft's wing, okay, this is an aircraft's wing, I need fine mesh resolution around the airfoil because of the boundary layer basically contain or can capture the importance of the forces acting on the airfoil. Far away above the airfoil, it's not that important, okay? What happens with the airflow on the airfoil as the plane is flying at a given angle of attack? How does that affect the turbulence of the aircraft? Okay, so you need a fine mesh around the wing to be able to capture all those complexities. So yes, there are commercial codes for generating these meshes. The mesh together with the boundary conditions need to be exported from the commercial software in certain format that can be recognized by the research CFD code or other commercial codes. That is something that we have to contend with, okay? When you are using two different systems, they will not talk to each other until you put it in the form that they would understand. Okay, and in the solution phase, you set up appropriate numerical parameters, choose appropriate solvers, solution procedure, solve the momentum, pressure, Poisson equations, get the flow quantities, velocity, turbulence, intensity, and so on and so forth. Okay, that is the solve part. In the reports, well, what do I want to report? Okay, reports say the time history of the residuals, of the velocity, the pressure, and so forth. The report the integral quantities such as total pressure, friction factor, drag coefficient, and so forth. XY plots could represent the centerline velocity, pressure distribution, friction factor distribution, and so forth. Other data that can be imported and put on top of an XY plot for validation. Okay. In other words, what report do you need from your analysis? Okay, it's not only pressure, it could be temperature, it could be species concentration. Okay, you have to specify that for the report to be generated. For post-processing analysis, you have analysis and visualization, calculation of derived variables such as vorticity, wall shear stresses, calculation of integral parameters, forces and moments, visualization, usually with commercial software, simple 2D contours, 3D isosurface plots, vector plots and streamlines, and animations. There are various special softwares such as this Amtech that can give you that capability for generating nice plots for presentation, post-processing plots for presentation. Okay, this is just an example of the software Flow Lab. Okay, And here, showing the operation panels that would allow you to create a mesh for this enclosure. Okay? And the enclosure will be the area around the airfoil. Okay? This is basically your airfoil or cross-section of a wing. Okay? And so within this CFD software, you see that in the mesh generation panel, you specify whether you want structured or unstructured. Do you want automatic or you want to manually enter your grid generation information? That means that manual means you're going to specify your delta X, you're going to specify your delta Y, that is your desired, okay? And then you want to specify your mesh density and so forth. Okay, so each CFD software, has its own, icon panels for the various phases of the implementation. In terms of the solving process, this is the solve panel, and you see that in the solution, you want to capture the residuals versus the iteration. Okay? Again, in the solver, am I solving a steady state problem or unsteady problem? The steady state will be, that means that your solution does not depend on time, okay, versus unsteady where the solution depends on time. So you have to select what you need, and you have to specify the number of iterations. Okay, so here 1,000 was selected. Convergence limit, okay, 0.001 is your convergence limit. Precision, single or double, you specify that. And then numerical scheme, you also selected here is a second order numerical scheme versus first order numerical scheme, and so on. Okay, so this is the process solve panel, and this is what you would expect to see in terms of the residual plots as the solution goes on. In terms of post-processing, so you go into the post-processing panel for flow lab. Again, you can specify in these regions what you want to look at in terms of the results, whether you want to see contours or you want to see vectors. Okay? These arrows above the airfoil are showing vectors of the velocity around the airfoil, whereas you have the contours in this case. And then here, this is showing the streamlines, okay, around the airfoil. Okay, again, you specify the type of results you want to see. All right, how much time have we spent? It leaves us just about 20 minutes. 15 minutes, okay. I open it up with 2 questions at this time. You see, I've gone through the whole CFD process in this lecture. Next time, we'll go into how to drill in and look at, okay, so behind all these solve operations, okay, what is the conservation equation looks like and where does it come from? We'll do some derivations next time. Okay, but I open it up for any questions. Yes?
For example, the residuals, how much is acceptable? What residual value might be acceptable?
Okay, so we look at the residuals, and The question is, what is acceptable? If I see that the trend is towards reduction of the residual, okay, then it's with time, then I know that it's acceptable. Okay, and basically, you basically indicate that you want your convergence within a certain value, right? So if I look at the residuals in terms of its conversion value, am I attaining the convergence criteria with each step of the iteration? When you see oscillating, then you know that your solution is no good. So maybe you need to tweak something in your solution. Have I motivated you to think of using CFD to solve a problem or pursuing further studies in CFD?
So that you might have to, do something to get the geometry first. So if you're going to design a reactor, you might first have to do some other technique to get the geometry before CFD can come in.
You have to basically create your geometry first, okay? And so depending on the complication, the system, maybe I'll neglect other areas of the reactor and focus on a given part of it. And so my CFD analysis will be just on that part, okay? I can choose to look at the whole automobile where I'm looking at the aerodynamics around it, or I'm just looking at the combustion chamber, okay? Or I'm looking at the radiator, okay? What part of the system do I want to look at? What is more important? Okay, you, the designer, have to look at it and design that accordingly. And remember, I said that CFD can be used for analysis and design. Okay, hopefully, I'll present a case study where we are using CFD basically to design a cloud formation chamber. Okay, we are designing a CFD to design a cloud formation and environmental chamber that would be used to analyze the impact of aerosol nucleation and coagulation in the formation of clouds on different planetary bodies. Okay, in doing that, we look at different case studies. Well, what if we don't have any introduction of particles of aerosols within the system? Okay, so we don't have any velocity inflow, but we are looking at what is the presence of gases within the chamber, and then there's no flow into it. That can be just one step. And then we throw in more complexities and say that let us have inflow of particles, aerosols, into the chamber. Okay, that can be another, extension of it. Now, okay, let's vary the temperature variation to some other level. Okay, the complexities can be built up as you go along. Comments or questions? Yes. That's a good question. Look, I'm not good at CAD. Okay? Somebody is going to generate a CAD model for me to import to do my work. You don't have to be the expert of everything. Okay? Or like I said, now we have 3D scanner. I have a scanner that can scan my whole body. Okay? Or for doctors in the biomedical field, they can basically scan the heart, the human, a human organ, so that they can do their analysis on the organ or tissue. Yes? Okay, so if you're doing a complex geometry and your system cannot handle that big complex system, yes, you start with a small system, a scaled down version. It's almost like when you're designing and you're building prototype. You're not going to right away build a complete system, right? You're going to do a prototype and see what happens. And a case in point is in fluid flow experiment, in doing wind tunnel experiment. Wind tunnel experiments are not always done on full-scale objects, okay? They do a prototype, a scaled-down model to do their experiment on it before, and then transfer the results to the full-scale model. So, that's another way of looking at it. Yes? How do I do the verification? That's a very good point. And so in doing CFD-related research, okay, or in doing any research for that matter, okay, look, why reinvent the wheel when somebody has already done something? Okay? I mean, that is why as researchers we do a literature review, okay, to find out what others have done in the field. And so, our work may be just either tweaking or making a modification of their system or applying it into a different domain. So if I can repeat their work and make sure it works, then I can now apply it to my system. Does that answer your question? Okay. So there are so many ways of verifying work that has been done, okay? And in the example that I'll show at the end, the case studies that I'll show at the end, yes, my students would take work that have been done in the field to validate their work before actually doing what we call parametric studies on their work. Yes? ANSYS has an inbuilt geometry, yeah, geometric solver. In fact, one of the things that happened, you see, Fluent, that is the CFD part of ANSYS, basically had two systems. They had Gambit and the CFD solver, okay? So you had to do your geometry in Gambit and then transport it into Fluent. Now, with the purchase of ANSYS by Fluent, ANSYS has already its grid generation system. So it was just a matter of integrating the ANSYS grid generation system or geometry generation system with the Fluent solver, all in one place. Comments or questions? Yes.
Predict something, and later wait for experiment to catch up. I got to that is here. That physical, I'm saying, physics something like Einstein does some calculations, and around that time there was no validation. Then later, the experiments catch up.
Yes. Yes, we are allowed to do that. And a case in point is the design of our aero cloud formation chamber that I'm talking about. this is something that is being designed, okay, we are using CFD to inform the design. When the system is actually built, now they are going to do the experiment. Okay, we are hoping that, you know, our analysis and design works the way we want it, but when they do the actual experiment, there may be some tweaking, closing of the loop that has to occur. You had another follow-up? Well, you know, if there are no more questions, thank you for your attention and engaging me. And we will continue with additional information on this topic.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
You get the slides.
Yes, I'll forward the slides. I'll make the slides available. Good. Oh, yeah, okay, yes, okay, yes, I would like to take a group.
Yeah, one of the proposals. In that case, I think the lights. The lights. Yeah, it's a one another light. Oh, the lights. Yeah. I'll do it outside. Yeah, outside.
No, not 9. No, no. I have to see the VC. It's tomorrow afternoon.
Tomorrow at 12.
How about, is 1 o'clock okay for you, or?
One is fine.
1 is fine?
Yeah, one is fine.
1 is fine, yeah. Yeah.
I think we wanted to find out. So if now the answers has the geometric component in terms of generating our 3D model.
Okay.
Because we've been trying to get some assistance with the planning.
Answers. Okay, sorry. For that